Ah, I have been gone for a while. I mean, I was showing up live streaming like every 2 days forever and ever. And I've been away for a break, but I am back. And the good news is, if you feel like you missed any of the shows, don't worry. You can always go to bizbookpublishinghub.com to listen to some of the past episodes. But stick around. We've got a great guest for you today who works with authors. Officially, here's the intro. Today's guest works with fiction and nonfiction authors who need to establish a steady writing practice to meet their publishing goals. This could be a first book or getting additional projects done amid the many demands of speaking, coaching, or a writing career. She offers a customized, practical solution to the question, how am I going to get all this done? While her specialty is process, she is well known for her chunky method of time and project management for writers. She's expanded her services to include authors who need developmental editing and structure guidance. She's a working full-time author with over 60, count them, 60 published books to her name with major publishing houses, independent publishing, and small presses. She's sold over 1.6 million books worldwide and counting, probably even higher now. If you want a coach who has actively succeeded in the business for over 20 years, she is that coach. Now, before we dive in, I want to share a quick word from our sponsor. All right, welcome back. And now is my pleasure to introduce you to our guest, Allie Plieter. Welcome, Allie.
Hi, thank you. It's really lovely to be here.
Wow. Okay, so you have an impressive number of books behind you. So you know a thing or two about a thing or two. And I'm just curious, how early in your life did you start writing? Is this something you've been doing just like forever and ever?
I have a really funny origin story for a writer. And for a long time, I didn't share it because I thought it was sort of quirky, but I've decided it's sort of part of my wonderful origin story. I actually started life as an actor. I wanted to be a soap opera villainess. How's that for a specific goal? But I'm very tall and I have a deep voice and I'm a brunette. So I didn't have the sort of ingenue thing. I thought I really wanted to be a villainess. And I went all the way through school. I went to Northwestern University, trained as an actor, and got my audition for ABC daytime television. At which point I was told quite point blank that I was too tall for television and that I should do something else. So I went into directing. It was very funny. The guy that I had auditioned for, like, took his glasses off and said, "Honey," now when someone does that, you know you're not going to like what's coming next. But he said, "Honey, you're I could have told you on the phone you're too tall." And I said, "Well, Diana Rigg is 5'10". And he looked me straight in the eye and said, "Are you Diana Rigg?" And completely shut me down. And 30 years later, I realized the ultimate comeback, like, you know how writers do, we'll discover the perfect line years after we wrote it. 30 years later, I realized the ultimate comeback should have been, "Let's find out." But I didn't have that. So I went from acting to directing and from directing to producing and producing to fundraising, which was a lot of writing on deadlines and storytelling to catch people's hearts. And one day I was having just a really lousy day at work raising money. And I called a friend of mine and said, I'm tired of this. I should just stay home and write. And I said the word bodice busters because she was an editor for a romance house. I said, I should just stay home and write bodice busters for you. It can't be that hard. Now, I'm the only person I know who got their start in the business by trash talking my friend's job. But she happened to be an editor for a major New York publishing house and very wisely took offense and said, "Fine, smarty pants, I dare you, write one." So long story short, it took me 3 years. I wrote that book and it sold. And that was, I think we are on, I'm looking at my bookshelf now, I think we are on book number 71. And that number of books sold around the world earlier this year topped 1.8.
Wow.
So don't do it the way I did it. People say, "You want to talk about how to break into writing?" I'm like, "I'm not your girl. I'm not the woman you want for that."
Yeah.
I got into it in a weird way.
What I love, though, there's so much take from this about transferable skills.
Yeah.
So you had your sights on acting and then you were rebuffed. And so that didn't happen, but you loved the the theater and the experience of acting. And so you were like, I'll do something else. So you got into directing, which led to producing. Producing is just about raising money, which most people don't really realize. And that gets you into the world of fundraising, which is a lot about writing. So it's interesting how there's a lot of, over time, like in retrospect, it kind of can make sense, where in the moment you're like, what am I doing next? I guess I'm doing this thing. And then that writing bug, the fact that you have this connection to someone who could give you like an intro, and that she sort of double dog dared you to just do it then if you're going to talk this. It's hysterical. And did you
really are worth thanking.
Yeah. Did you stay in that genre when you were writing?
I did. I've been in romance. I live in 2 popular fiction genres. I would say 50 of the 70 are in mass market romance. I do a lot of work for Love Inspired, which is the faith-based arm of good old Harlequin romance. The ones in the grocery stores, those are the ones that go all around the world. And then I also branched into murder mysteries about 6 or 7 years ago. And now I have a whole series of murder mysteries coming out. And I love it. I think what it was is, from the directing standpoint, I knew what I wanted to have happen in a scene, but I didn't have the talent to embody it. So the storytelling allows me to hit that mark without having to be the person on stage, making it look in the body that I'm feeling the emotion that you want the audience, the reader, to have. So yeah, they are transferable skills. Are
you writing under a pen name?
No, everything is Allie Plieter, and that's kind of a deal breaker for me. I'm kind of like you. I'm a multi-passionate. I think multi-passionate entrepreneur is the phrase that you use.
Yeah.
And I want all of that to be connected, and the challenge becomes making sure that the people who only want the romance can find that, and the people who only want the mystery or only want the coaching or the writing. So it makes for a really complicated website, but other than that, it's okay.
My wife is an avid reader. She mostly listens with some Kindle. Last year was 282 books. She's going to probably surpass that this year. I'm at about 150 because she feeds my Libby app. A lot of romance in there, but she also has that issue where it's like an author that she knows for one genre comes out with, a suspense book or a mystery book. And, but she's on enough lists and enough websites, enough groups that someone gives the heads up, and then she can decide. Usually she says, yes, I already like the writer. Like, I'll check, that, and then it branches out. And then suddenly it's like, she starts giving me a lot more of this new genre. She goes, wait, I didn't know we liked it. And I'm like, oh, wow, I like mystery. Like, I had no idea. Like, I'll try anything now. I don't like taking the effort to figure out a good author, and she curates it for me. But when you're connected to these communities, I think authors like you can find your audience.
It helps that they're closely related. I write cozy mystery, so think Murder, She Wrote, right? So I'm living in the world of Murder, She Wrote and the Hallmark Channel. Those live next to each other. I think if I started writing horror, or spy suspense, it might be a bigger hop for someone. But they're closely related enough that I'm careful about how I sort of curate that crossover, what I call cross-pollination, where I let readers in one genre know about the other, and that it's okay not to pick up anything, but they live close enough that I have a fair amount of readers who will read. I love it when they say, all I need to know is that you wrote it.
Yeah. I'm going to have to pull up your Goodreads after this. I think that would be a great place to see that, and your Amazon will have like your author central page, because I'm not listing 60 books on the page, 70 some odd. Yeah. What are some top books people should look for if they're trying to get into your?
That's like asking a mom what her favorite children are. It's a tough one. I would say for the mystery, probably the first and my mysteries are craft based. I'm a very passionate knitter. And so the 3 mysteries that I just recently finished for Berkeley are all knitting based murder mysteries. Yes. How niche can you get?
Yeah.
And so the first one is called On Skein of Death. And there's a pun because every cozy mystery has to have a pun. So skein is SKEIN, which is the yarn word for a thing of yarn. So On Skein of Death is the first in the Riverbank Knitting Mystery Series. And And then the romances, oh, there's so many. I would say probably anything within the Wander Canyon series, or oh gosh, they're just probably anything. I usually tell people, well, okay, I tell people to find the first book in the series, but it's also kind of a pet peeve of mine that if you pick up the third book in the series, I make sure I write it so you don't feel like you didn't get the in joke. Right?
Oh, that's nice.
So
Wow.
I make really sure that every book is a satisfying read in and of itself. So that if you read book 3, you feel good and you can go read book 4 and 5, because they're usually 6-book series in the Harlequin world. And then you can go back and find 1 and 2, but you won't feel like you won't know what you're doing if you don't go read 1 and 2.
And then you also wrote the Chunky Method.
Yes.
The handbook. And that came out. I'm just looking to see when that came out. What year was that? That was 2016. 2016. Yeah. Okay, I'm looking. So had you written nonfiction before that?
I wrote parenting books. I wrote faith-based parenting books, and that was my first start in nonfiction. I actually started the fiction and the romance at the same time. So I've been sort of a dual person for a while. The Chunky Method was just, it's my passion. I mean, I love being known for the novels, and they're wonderful, and I love that they go all around the world. But if you ask me why I'm on the planet, it's the Chunky Method and what it does for writers and how it brings. I love the person who said to me, "Holy cow, you've quantified the creative process. I didn't think it was possible." And to watch that light bulb go off in someone's head when I'm speaking or they're reading the book, I just love that. I could watch that all day long.
So I want, curious, like how you shifted to becoming a provider for authors, not just an author. And it sounds like the Chunky Method is how you're sharing that content. But when did it first sort of become apparent that you should do this? Is it because everyone asked you how you were being so prolific? Like clearly you were good at something and they wanted to know how you were doing it. Like when did you realize there was another audience, which was authors or would-be authors?
It was a lot. Well, category romance really is a volume business. 4 books a year for category romance is not exceptional. I have colleagues who do even more. I've done as many as 6. I don't recommend it. But people were sort of asking me how I did it. And it really was born of grant writing comes in, you're answering questions. So it comes in chunks. So you have to plan it out. I'm also married to a project engineer. So that helps a lot too. But you're right. People started asking me, how are you doing this? And how are you staying steady? And I realized it was the concept of a writing practice that was missing, that people were waiting for writing to be a function of inspiration. And yes, sometimes it is, but more often than not, it's a function of planting your backside in the chair with the keyboard in front of you and just doing it. And so people started asking me, and then I thought I taught it sort of at writing conferences and things for a while. And then I realized this needed to be, and it's a very small book. It's a super fast read. There's no extra fluff in there at all. Because who's got time, right?
I think it was Steve. I might be quoting the wrong person here. I think it's Stephen King or some other famous author said, when are you inspired to write? Every day at 9 a.m.? Like,
yeah. They say, how do you write 4 books a year? I say 1,200 words a day, 5 days a week. There is no magic. I have no magic wand here. I just get it done. And the magic of a chunk is that if you figure out what your chunk is, which is every individual writer's amount of words that they can produce in a single sitting, and it's different for every writer, but if you can figure it out, then you plan to do a chunk a day. You're not asking yourself more than what you need. Then you become a smart planner based on your own creativity, not what someone else's idea of what a regular writer ought to do. And I think that's the power of the Chunky Method, is that it's built from the inside out rather than someone else's expectations in.
I love this. I remember working on my first book. Before I actually got traction and did it, I got a lot of advice. And a lot of people told me I had to wake up early and get the extra time in, before the kids go to school kind of thing or whatever. And I was like, I'm not doing a book then, because I don't I don't want to wake up early. Like what? Like that's the requirement. And I wrote all my books from 9 p.m. to 1 a.m. That's just like, it's quiet in the house. There's no emails or social media distractions. I can just sit down and maybe it's only an hour and a half one night and it's 3 hours because I had inspiration another night, 30 minutes one other night, but it all happened in the evening. And I've done that for all my books. And I want people to know that that's possible, because I kept hearing that, like, you've got to get up early. And similarly, if I heard I had to write, I don't know, like 2,000 words a day, and that felt like too much for me, I would just think, I can't do it. But you're saying, figure out what your amount is, your chunk that feels good. And I also love the idea of it being consistent. I will be honest and say my first book, I was writing inconsistently. I was putting these like 6-hour days once a month on my calendar. It would take me about an hour to figure out where I'd left off and what I had been talking about every time, because I wasn't touching the book. So then I made a rule. I had to touch it for 15 minutes a day, no matter what. It could be to review and edit. It could be to brainstorm. It could be to write, and obviously I could have gone much further than that, but I had to touch it regularly just to keep the ideas flowing. And that's when I finally wrote the book. When I was trying to write it sparsely, like, every few weeks, I never got the rhythm in. So again, everyone just needs to figure out what works for them. And you're giving people a tool to figure that out.
And there are big, what I call big chunk writers and little chunk writers. And big chunk writers, because some people to go hide themselves away and write 2,000 words a day for 3 days, or, works for them, but they're thinking, I got to write every day. So there's so many people telling you what you need to do. And there are behavioral differences between big chunk writers and little chunk writers. Little chunk writers tend to be able to write anywhere on anything. Big chunk writers tend to need to be in like a certain place with certain things on the wall and music. And so the discovery process that I go through with a client in the first couple of meetings is figuring out all of that they've never realized, A, leads to frustration when it's not done, and B, that I'm not, crazy. I have all the pieces. I just need to know how to schedule in light of them. Mm-hmm. And so that awakening process, that discovery process, then the plan that we put together after we come across all of that stuff is amazing. And it just, you're never asking more of yourself than what you absolutely know you can do. And there is powerful momentum behind that.
Yeah, I mean, you're giving them permission to set different goals, and then you're giving them the momentum by having them achieve the micro goals they keep setting for themselves, which makes them feel much better about the process going forward. That it is that momentum that I think got me from thinking about writing a book to writing a book initially. And then once you do it, you are like, well, I guess I can no longer say I can't do this. So then another one. Someone did tell me after my first book came out, the best way to sell it was to write books 2 and 3. So that planted a seed, and now I'm about to work on book 4, right? So like, I do think that there's a way in which it's like, well, I don't identify as a writer. I've got 3 published books. I write social media and emails and content all the time. It's just not my first medium. Mm-hmm. I'm no longer angsty about it though. I think I just had feelings about it that I no longer have. It's just like, I know I have to have the right time and space. It's kind of like now I got to reread your books. I flipped through it when I first got it, and now I'm like, oh, why am I not reading this before I'm about to go write another book? This is a good time to be reminded. That one we'll put a link to in the notes for sure.
That's one of the reasons why I'm always especially excited to work with someone on their first book, because when you establish that practice, then when you have to go and layer on another book, right now, I'm always working on 4 books, which means I'm writing one, editing one, promoting one, and selling, proposing one and selling one all at the same time. If I didn't have that structure underneath me, I'd go bananas. And everyone thinks the structure is going to somehow squash the art out of it. And absolutely the opposite is true. You put that structure underneath and it sort of unleashes your creativity, because you're doing it in a way that your creativity was born to be expressed. So
I know you do multiple things. You're also doing some content development and just helping people shape the arc of a book. And that's both for fiction and nonfiction. Is that
correct?
True?
Yes.
So for folks who are writing a book to help them grow their business, is there something in particular you're suggesting they keep an eye on as far as metrics of success? This is a question I ask on my author panel every time. Like, what did you think your book would be like back when you started writing the book? What were the metrics of success? Metrics of success you were paying attention to, and then now as a more experienced author, like what do you now think is important? So, as someone who is clearly an experienced author, but also who works with a lot of authors, like where are people putting their attention they maybe don't need to be, and where should they put more attention, like as far as the book having a long history of success, as far as people wanting to read it and knowing it exists?
I think coming into it knowing what you want from the book. It's particularly in a business situation, it is a terrific calling card. It is a terrific way to establish credibility and authority. It's not always a terrific income stream. Not that it can't be, but I'm always sad when someone comes in and because let's face it, social media is filled with people saying, take my $99 seminar and have a 6-figure writing career by Friday. Those make me nuts. But I think that if you understand what the book can do for you, it can establish your credibility. It can take your message to be permanent. Someone sees you at a conference or they worked with you, then they get your book, they put it on your shelf. You have real estate in their office, for the foreseeable future. So it's more of a tool in the business world than it is the entertainment factor in the fiction world. But you still have to do the good storytelling. It still has to be a compelling read. They still have to open page 1 and keep going, right? You don't want to put them on and go, oh, well, I'll get to this when I have time, right? You want them to open up the book, be absolutely enthralled from page 1 and keep reading. So I think that the metric of success has to be, you have to think about it before you start it, because it will adapt the book that you make. People often ask me, why isn't the Chunky Method handbook bigger? It's small. It's like 10,000 words. And my answer is always, because it doesn't have to be. It does what it does. Some of my other books have been larger, but if you have a clear picture of what you want the book to do for you, those are the 6 measures of success. And it's not always an income stream. Sometimes it is, but not always.
Well, I think of it as an income stream insofar as it will make it easier to be hired as a speaker, coach, consultant, etc. Yeah. And then they will hopefully buy bulk orders of your book.
Exactly. That's where
right? Like you get hired, you get hired to speak, and then you're like, don't you want the book? Right? Like, oh, there's another budget for that. Fantastic. So I think having the book does allow for some new revenue opportunities, but it also means that people just treat you as the expert that you are, as long as the book has done well. Part of what I'm working with is people who just hit publish and then they want the magic to sort of fall on them. And I'm like,
right.
There is no fairy who's coming around and sprinkling you. Like, you have to do some work. The thing you mentioned earlier about sizes of books, I wanted to talk about that because I think this is another really a misnomer that a lot of authors have. And so my first book was 32,000 words and my second was 27. The layout is very different. One has more spacing. And so they're both 5 by 8s. They're 5 by 8s. And part of the reason they're 5 by 8s is because they're so small. If they had been 6 by 9, which is like the traditional business book, they'd be pamphlets. You know what I mean? Like, they wouldn't look like a book. And then I wrote a third book thinking it would be about 30,000, 35,000 words, but it needed more because it's a manual. So it ended up being 64,000 words and has 100 images in it. And, I was surprised, but I agree with you. Don't write more than you need to. And if you find yourself writing more than, for nonfiction, mostly I would say keep it on the smaller side till we actually finish it, split it into a series. The good news about fiction is most people will reach the end. But for nonfiction, there is no guarantee that people are going to go to the end. It's quite the opposite. I also love how people put all their book me, call me, connect with me all at the end. I'm like, okay, for tiny percentage of people are going to actually see that. I'd love to hear a success story, though, from one of your clients who thought they couldn't do any of this, followed your chunky method, work with you on the development of a story. Anything that you want to share about how someone was able to take this and run with it?
One of my favorite clients, and it's interesting because this was actually not a book format. He was asked by his consulting firm to write a daily blog, and it wasn't working. He just couldn't make it work. And so he came to me and said, I need to fix this. And we went through the discovery process and discovered that he's actually a big chunk writer. And for big chunk writers, they need to, like you said, take a lot of time to get down into that zone, spend a lot of time there. And then there's this sort of re-entry process into the world off the page. And he was forcing that every day and it wasn't working. So after we went through this discovery process, we recreated his writing schedule so that he took 2 Fridays a month and wrote, 10 blogs each Friday. And suddenly the work was better. He felt better about it. It flowed more naturally because he was working with it, and he had done that sort of separation, that sort of compartmentalization that big chunk writers need. I always laugh and say, if you were kind of the toddler who didn't like your food to touch, you're probably a big chunk writer. So it was a concept where he was perfectly talented and brilliant in the work, but he was forcing it in a way that didn't make any sense at all with how his creativity works. And once we overhauled his schedule, so that's one of my favorite ones. Another one was a client who was also a big chunk writer, but as many writers, lived in a little chunk world, right? He had a family, he had a full-time job down in Chicago, and he was being very frustrated because he couldn't touch it every day in a way that felt good. And so every time he got to Saturday where he'd have his big chunk of writing, he would feel behind the 8 ball and frustrated. So we worked out an unusual schedule. He's probably the most unusual schedule I've ever worked out, where we bought, which is another one of my favorite tools, big oversized index cards, like the kind that are the size of a paperback novel, not the little ones we think of from school. And he gave himself the task of filling out one of those longhand, one on the way in on the train to work and one on the train back. That meant that we were waking up his creativity by messing with his usual, because he didn't usually write longhand. So his brain already knew, oh, this is different. I have to work differently here. And once we put those together, then when he got to the Saturday, he had the equivalent of a full day writing done. And then he came into that Saturday not feeling behind, actually feeling ahead of the game. And he was a fiction author, and his momentum just took off because we'd found a way to work with the way his innate creativity. And I love the people who say, I'm just a big chunk writer, but I'm forced to live in a little chunk world. And my response is usually, okay, let's figure out how that looks.
I love these examples because it shows that it's our approach. Like, no one told the daily blog writer they had to write daily, but
Right.
he interpreted the assignment. And like, you're like, oh, well, then I have to do. No, you don't have to do it that way. Like, it could have worked that way for somebody else. It doesn't have to work that way for you. I love the index card and making use of the daily commute, right? This is the moment where you're kind of stuck as far as what you can do. You can scroll on Facebook, or you could use that time to write. Let's use that time to write instead. I also know people that are using more audio to like take voice notes. Is there any of your clients doing that in these sort of increment moments?
I have one that really makes active use of dictation. It works for some people. It doesn't work for others. If I break an arm, I'll probably have to learn how to dictate. Heaven forbid. So yes, it's usually a case of sitting down with someone and really saying what's going to work for you. Sometimes the dictation works, sometimes it doesn't. But to discover, it's a really individualized process. Yeah. And to me, that's the gratifying thing for me, to work individually with an author and come up with what's going to work for them. Some of them are using dictation. I have writers who use iPads. I have writers who use little keyboards attached to their cell phones. I have writers who use legal pads. Whatever's going to work for you, once we figure that out and we put that in the process and it's in the schedule, then you get to the finish line when you want to, and it's absolutely quantifiable.
I love that you're not, this is the way. I think
Exactly.
a lot of people who are working with authors have a way, a process, a system, like follow these steps. And you're like, let's solve your problem.
Exactly.
let's meet you where you are and see the totality of your life and figure it out. I have used Speechify for the last 2 books that I wrote, where I would write, and the first time I ever used it was because I was tired of reading my own book out loud to test it, and I discovered Speechify. But then I realized I could write a few paragraphs and then play it, and then edit when I heard it, it didn't sound right. I would stop and I'd edit it and I'd play it back, and that allowed me to like write a flow, and then immediately kind of just go through and tighten it up and notice what was missing. And it was a lot better than the first book. I read it so many. I was sick of it. I was like, it must be done because I don't want to talk about it anymore. It must be done. I was so tired of reading it out loud and reading it out loud and reading it out loud. And this Speechify actually helped me in the middle of writing. And I would never have thought to do that initially. So, having these creative opportunities, like having someone like you, who now clearly has a range of ways that this can be done. And so you're not going to be pigeonholing people. That's a really cool thing for people to learn about. I love, you and I connected. We kind of knew each other a little bit through the National Speakers Association,
Right.
the whole Kathy Fayok community, writers. And that was just amazing. And one of the people I really believe does so much for other writers as well. But you said yes to the BizBook Publishing Hub when it was not really even a thing yet. Earlier, about a year ago now, when we were recording this, I was like, I had this idea. Can I talk to you about it? And it blew up and it grew to a much bigger thing. We're now revamping our membership and having different levels, holding events every month. There's a podcast now that you're on, right, about it. So what attracted you to the idea of it? And what value do you think a community of referrals, partners like that has for authors and or for referral partners?
2 things. First of all, I think that there is this myth out there in the writing world that you can just throw down words on a page, yank it up onto Amazon, and it's going to be great. And the concept of you need good guidance, and to talk to people who understand the process where you are. If it's outlining, if it's editing, if it's formatting, if it's whatever. Yes, you can do this DIY. But it doesn't usually work that way. And so to have access to a group of vendors, it's probably not the right word, providers, whom are legit. And that's the other piece of it, is there is so much. I'm trying to find the nice word for this. There's a lot of trash out there in terms of people offering you how to write a book. And they're going to tell you exactly what you want to hear, even if that's a lie. That burns my toast. I'm always yelling at my Facebook feed. And I think that the hub was the answer to that, of people who understood each other's professional skills, could say to someone, and I actually hear this a lot from editors and the sort of boutique publishers of, yes, you have a manuscript, but it's not ready. You need to go back and do some other things, and to be able to say, you need an editor to look at this, or you need a structure, or this book actually isn't done. You rushed it and I can tell. Those kinds of things. So to have access to the providers who, because sometimes as in a writer's anxiousness to get it up, and boy, have I seen some books that just did not belong. They did not belong uploaded, and the person just got anxious and I just want it done, so I'm gonna press send. I'm going to press upload, and it wasn't ready. And it's hard to take that back. So I really like that there is a community of people who know each other's work. You can be talking to one provider and they can say, you know what? Yes, I'll work with you 2 or 3 steps down the road, but what you really need is this person over here. And I know you don't want to hear that, but you really should think about it. And so I liked that aspect of the referrals that were skill specific.
Yeah, I was just talking to someone the other day that you can find someone to print your book. That doesn't mean they're a publisher. Like, they haven't, they're like, oh, you took 20 blogs and put it together in a book and you wanted to publish it? Great. I said to someone, if the person you're hiring, whatever stage you're at, editing, cover design, or publishing, and they don't ask you the point of your book and why you wrote it and who it's for and what your audience is or what your goals are for the book, or if they don't ask you any of those questions, do not hire them. Like, they're just going to be like, oh, okay, you want me to do a thing? I'll do a thing. Like, no, that's what for me was so important, because there is a difference between fiction and nonfiction, as you well know. And there's a ton of resources for fiction, huge communities of fiction writers. And when I was trying to find ones for nonfiction, I did, but they were not business. And then I realized, oh, there's a difference between travel and memoir and writing a book as a thought leader. Mm-hmm. And where are those people? Someone who understands that I need to have an audience to this book, because the book isn't selling itself. I'm selling speaking. I'm selling my coaching services. So that's part of the vetting, was just finding people who understood that. So I love that I got to know more about you and what you're doing with the Chunky Method. Because I feel like, well, one, I need to be reminded before I start working on the next book. But also, it's the kind of skill that writers need to acquire for themselves. So just even hearing about it, I hope it gets them thinking a little bit differently.
I think the other thing about that you just touched on, in terms of that sometimes people aren't talking about, is that prolific is still the new black, right? When I started way back, I think my first book was published in 2001, maybe 2000. One book a year, one book every 12 months was fine. And in the fiction world, Amazon and the other publishing worlds have a shorter and shorter attention span. So practice is important, because you need to be able to continue to produce. It might not be a book, but you've got to do a book, and you've got to do some other things to keep yourself in the public eye and to keep yourself top of mind. So you can't just sort of write a book and sit back and go, okay, I'm done. No, you've got to do the next thing and the next thing. And if you don't have that system in place, and probably the providers who can help you spin all of these plates, authors are way more like small businesses than they are artists. Even the ones who, even the business people, it's not just an artistic venture anymore from the pure writing standpoint. You got to know how to spin all those plates. And so you need to have people you need a whole team of people. And the Hub gives you the opportunity to gather that team from vetted sources nice and quick.
Love it. In a moment, I want your advice for someone who's writing a book to help them grow a business. But first, a quick word from our sponsor. Okay, Allie, someone's writing a book. They're doing it because they're a speaker or a coach, they're a thought leader, they want to be, they've got this IP that they're really excited about. And there's a zillion ways to make mistakes. So what are some of the things that they should do to make sure that it goes well for them?
I will tell you that I'm often asked, what's your advice to writers? And my primary advice is just this: shut up and write. When I was first starting, I would absorb craft book, and I would absorb all these other things. And I would come back to that editor friend, and she would say, Allie, shut up and write, because nothing begets writing. Nothing clarifies your thought process. Nothing will tell you who the book is for and what it's going to do, except actually writing it. And you don't want to be getting ready to get ready. I can't remember. I think it might even be Lois Kramer who says, only writing is writing. Talking about writing is not writing. Reading about writing is not writing. So that's one. You've just got to start writing. Even if you feel lost, there are many, many days, even 70 books into it, where I sit down and go, I don't know. I don't know what the words are today. But invariably, by the end of the 1,200 words, I do know. So that's job one. Just actually write it. And then the concept of knowing, and I really do believe that writing brings this out. I mean, you have to kind of know where you're headed in the beginning, but it's kind of like driving at night. You have to know where you're going. You have to have your directions, but the headlights are only going to show you the next 200 yards. So you got to trust that the next 200 yards and the next 200 yards and the next 200 yards are coming, or you'll never get there. So I'm a writer. I love metaphors. There's my metaphorical advice. Turn on your headlights and go.
Wow. Okay. This is so great because I can actually map it to when I was talking about writing a book, but not taking action because I was reading about it. I was reading a lot about writing proposals, even though I had no intention of being traditionally published. And I was trying to write a proposal, and I just was doing lots of half measures and half steps. But then I committed to writing the book and actually started writing it. And it was written in 3.5 months. Like it was like 2 years of talking about it. And then it was 3.5 months of writing it. So yes, it was writing that led to writing, not reading about it, not thinking about it, not talking about it. Oh my God, that's so smart though, because it's something that I probably hadn't fully even realized. That's why I finally get out of my own way, because I turned my headlights on and I started going. Great metaphor. How can people find you and follow your work?
Well, I do a lot of different things. So the best place to start is allieplieter.com. And Allie Plieter is ALLIEPLEITER. Yay to get a phonetic last name. .com, and that will take you to the coaching and the speaking and all 70 books. They're nicely sorted into series by website designers. Heavens, how are we going to deal with all of these? So it's a great place to sort of get acquainted and find what you need to get started. You may meet me for the fiction and we'll talk about the nonfiction, but the website will give you places to find all the information you're looking for and to connect with me.
Fantastic. We're going to put all these links, including mentions the Chunky Method Handbook, links to your other books in the show notes at bizbookpublishinghub.com, which is where you'll also find our hub partners, the podcast show notes, invitation to come to our free virtual networking event for writers and authors, and lots of other resources for writers. Check it out at bizbookpublishinghub.com. Allie, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
I'll leave you with the charge I give all of my clients. Go make words.